Good day, and welcome to this session of the Southern Feminist Futures Festival. Welcome to all those who are joining us. I can see we have quite a few participants filling up. And while people are joining, I will just start with the introductions and start by saying what an incredible festival this has been. I'm over 60 years old, and it is the first time I have witnessed such a conversation in all languages, across the South, on all time zones. If I have a sleepless look about me, it's because it's been irresistible. There have been amazing panels, and the last one, just recent memory, was last night's panel on memory, which was absolutely profound. So I'll begin by thanking the organizers. I'm on the list, but the people behind who've done the really hard work of putting together this incredible digital infrastructure. I want to thank my fellow organizers and all those who've been behind the scenes and our translators who are making this really, truly transnational feminist event possible. And what could be a more fitting topic than feminist digital architecture? We're talking about the structure, the architecture of the very system that is enabling us to meet together. And it's quite a meeting. We're going to talk about two transnational feminist publications that emerged independently on the opposite sides of the Atlantic. Feminist Africa was born in Cape Town in the year 2000. And we're also going to hear from the Caribbean Review of Gender Studies, our sister journal over at the University of West Indies. Both of these are regional and therefore transnational Southern feminist publications that began with the century and were on the front lines of trying to use digitalization to power feminism forward. So, but we've not been able to meet and talk like this. So we're happy to do so with a growing audience because we think that our experience matters to everybody. It's been, in a way, pioneering, but 20 years, nearly 25 years on, it's really important that we look to the future. So we're going to do a combination. I'm the moderator just because I'm the oldest, but no, I'm not the oldest. My Caribbean sisters are senior, couple of them, and I learned from them. So I'll start with that. But so we're going to have a round table. I'm not going to dominate. We're going to each of us share from our different perspectives as institution builders and as editors. And I will say all of us are both. What it has been like to set up the first South-South digital feminist journal publications, and some of the struggles we went through, and some of the contradictions we still struggle with as we navigate the frontier between academic capitalism, which appropriates our products so that we can barely access them, or many parts of the South can hardly access them, and open access, the possibility of free intellectual knowledge, freedom for all. So we navigate that, and we're based in universities, campuses, as it happens, but it need not have been so. So without more ado, I'm going to turn the table over to my colleagues, starting with the Institute founders. After that, we'll go to the journal founding editors, and each will give brief inputs, and then we'll be able to discuss. So we can compare, but I think each story is quite unique and rich in its own right, but we will Go ahead. So I'm going to start with the person who preceded me at the African Gender Institute at the University of Cape Town. That is none other than the irascible Professor Jane Bennett, who hosted me, welcomed me, and who became my collaborator in everything that came out of the AGI for 10 years. And then we will turn to Professor Rhoda Reddock from the University of West Indies, who, like Jane in Cape Town, hi Rhoda, good morning. Professor Reddock is now emeritus, but she was the sort of one of the founding weights behind the Institute for Gender and Women's Studies in the University of West Indies. And both of these founding feminists, really, of these institutional structures in patriarchal academies, but with clear feminist heads and visions, made it possible for us eventually to build feminist journals out of those institutes. So that will be Professor Reddock, and then following her, Patricia Mohammed, my colleagues from the ISS. You guys, I haven't seen you in 30 years. Patricia Mohammed, who was the first named editor of the journal, and that's it. We go back to we go back quite some years, but you know, I'm mentioning these personal connections in passing because actually we know they were really important. But
no, that there has got no
sorry, somebody was saying something to me. No? Okay, I'll proceed. And then we have the next generation. We're old enough to have begun to build towards the future. So we've already, actually Feminist Africa is in the midst of its first major relocation and transition. So we'll hear from Dr. Akosu Adakwa from the Institute of African Studies, which is Feminist Africa's new home. So we've moved it from Cape Town to Ghana. And we will also hear from Gabrielle Hussein, who's the current editor of the Caribbean Review of Gender Studies. So that's the lineup as listed on the program. Each of these people are phenomenal. Hi, Gabrielle.
Hi,
gosh,
morning,
not a day older, 20 years. Actually, I saw you 10 years ago. We're all looking great, I want to say. What a thrill, I'm just thrilled to see people. So let's begin at the beginning. I'm going to turn over right away to Jane Bennett, who is still in Cape Town at the African Gender Institute at the University of Cape Town. Is Jane Bennett with us?
Yes, she is. And thank you, Amina, for the invitation to say a few words. And it's amazing to be in this kind of space and to have been in some of the other festival spaces where one can actually feel at least temporarily safe with the meaning of the virtual. I think have there's ever been a year in which we've had reasons to be profoundly suspicious of the connections between the neoliberal and the digital. It's been this year. And you know, it's something that I've thought about a lot myself in my work and listened to others thinking about. So it's an extraordinary relief to be in this Zoom space. Thank you for the invitation. It's lovely to see faces I haven't met before, but whose words I've read and whose spirits of feminist energy I know have inspired others that I know, and also to see faces of people that I do know, both here in the panel and the attendees. So yes, I could carry on in this vein for quite a while. I mean, I'm not irascible. I'm the
unrelenting.
Well,
irrepressible. Irrepressible. Unrelenting.
Okay, I'll try, but I want to be more contained than you're allowing me as a tray, because I'm so excited to listen to everyone else. And you've asked me to say a few words about the African Gender Institute, which is a very, very difficult thing to do, because as all of you will know, if you've been involved with a project in its many iterations and political contexts with many different people, saying a few words about 20 years, near impossible. What I would want to immediately flag is that the African Gender Institute was in fact not really founded. It was occasioned. It was a moment of a combination of political will, luck, in a very, very young country. South Africa was only 6 years old at the time. In fact, it was 5 years old in any kind of relation to the possibility of working there for anything other than the end of apartheid. And South Africa was also a space that was profoundly ignorant. I mean, you know this, and we're friends, I'm just going to say it. South Africans knew nothing about the continent. Some of us, those who'd been involved in liberation movements that had had strong connections with different parts of Southern Africa, knew something about the continent. But as a cultural zone of many languages, many ideas, many brilliances, to be quite honest, most South Africans thought that if you crossed the Limpopo, you got to London. Mm. So the African Gender Institute began alongside many, many other projects based in the country, determined to try and make a go of this new political democracy. I mean, we didn't make very good a go of it, but we were very determined. And what was special about the AGI's determination is that we wanted to work with continental feminists to learn, to figure out how to contribute, to begin to suture the terrible ideological, economic, and political chasm between the tip of Africa, the East, the West, the North. We knew we were lost without you. So we began. Amina joined us in 1999. Many others were in and out in interesting ways, as sometimes as students, but much more often as co-feminists, co-project developers. And we'll talk a little about how Feminist Africa, the journal, came to be part of projects whose desire was, it's a very popular word now, decolonize, but that's what we were up to. We were up to saying, please, can we grow a feminist creativity and intellectual, imaginative community that does not respect the limitations of our borders?
Thank you. Great. Okay, well, I'm inclined to move. Thank you, Jane. I think that's a very good start. The serendipity, the occasion, the context. Let's hear what was happening in the Caribbean, the conditions that gave rise to the very different, because I was there too, the founding of the gender studies, I say movement in the Caribbean. So I'm going to turn over to
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amina. The Institute for Gender and Development Studies, which began as a Center for Gender and Development Studies, was officially established in 1993 within the structure of the University of the West Indies. Now, I must say the University of the West Indies is a regional institution currently serving 17 Caribbean territories, most of them former British colonies. And there are now 4 physical campuses: Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and the new 5-island campus in Antigua, Barbuda, and 1 virtual campus, the Open Campus, which also has centers in all of the other countries that don't have physical campuses. So it's a big, complex machinery. Now, the establishment of the IGDS came 11 years after negotiations, pilot teaching, research, a series of disciplinary and interdisciplinary seminars, which of course my colleague Patricia Mohammed was one of the leaders in organizing, as well as campaigning and negotiation. And in 1993, after those 11 years, the IGDS was established. I remember, Mina, I took up office in 1994. My colleague Udin Barito took up in Barbados in 93. And I believe Pat Mohammed took up leadership at Mona in 1994 as well. Pat, you could correct me. I know at St. Augustine, I had one secretary, I had myself, one secretary, and half a cleaner, and half a messenger. That's how we began. We eventually combined those two posts into an office attendant. And we weren't even allocated space. It was up to our skill to eventually identify space, get the funds to have it developed. And in fact, we are still in that space to this day. Now, what was interesting about the IGDS is that one of the reasons we took so long to negotiate is because the group that led to its formation, the Women and Development Studies group, was a multidisciplinary group with people from humanities, sciences, medicine, engineering, etc. And therefore, in our institutionalization, we were clear that we wanted to be transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and multidisciplinary. In fact, one of our former professors, Esther Leorini, referred to us as undisciplined. And therefore, the center was established on its own, reporting directly to the Vice Chancellor through the campus principals. And I think that gave us a lot of autonomy. We didn't have much money or resources, but we had the autonomy to begin to shape a program in the ways that we wanted. And I think one of our clear philosophical positions was, and I think continues to be, that women's studies and gender studies cannot be separated from the movements that gave rise to it. I think we saw our units as the result of feminist activism. And we knew that unlike English or mathematics, we could be lobbed off at any point. And therefore our allies and our support had to come from the movement and the people in communities outside of the campus, which is why for us, in addition to our teaching, research, etc., our outreach and activism continued to be critically important. So I think that like many formal institutions, we have faced our own challenges, and especially now during a period of economic crisis, we continue to face those challenges. But I do believe that we've established a structure and a system at a regional level, which provides us with the basis to confront these challenges as we are in the present, currently. So I think that I will stop there for now, just to say that we see our teaching, research, outreach, and activism as based on our notions of being part of a process aimed at gender equality and social justice, and of course, transformations in relations, gender and sexuality relations in the region and internationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhoda. That was a nice roundup. And of course, I can remember some of those workshops, but the thing that's striking me is that you had 11 years of workshops and gatherings and preparatory work by the time you founded an institute in what became the institute in 1993. That's very important. Can I just go back to Jane, to the AGI, because it was very different. When I got there, there was only Jane and a small cluster of project staff. And there had been, well, Jane, was there any preparatory work? Can you say a little bit about that? If she's still there with us?
Yes, no, of course.
So
I'm
different.
still here.
I have to go back to you and say, wow. And I'm remembering those long preparations because I came to the AGI after I'd witnessed what they were doing in the Caribbean. And I saw that. And then I came to South Africa and basically tried to use that model to build a Pan-African institute, just like they had. But the conditions were so different, it could never have happened. But I did think it could. I thought we could have a huge Pan-African institute combining deracialization and transformation with Pan-Africanization. And the reason it had to be rooted on the continent was because everyone in South Africa wanted off the continent. The academics, that is. So in the university, a white university like Cape Town, they were looking out. So the continental grounding was what made it possible, because that drew support from very senior, I remember very senior ANC people had to back us up and give me a sense of security, because it was just post-apartheid. So we didn't feel secure. I felt it was, but it took me only a day to realize that they were terrified. So I needn't feel insecure at UCT. Jen.
Thanks, Amina, and also thanks, Rhoda. It is lovely to see you and to hear you. Just for everybody to know, Rhoda also spent some time at the AGI and, in fact, edited. Yes, Amina's showing an issue of Feminist Africa. I think it's a 2007 one. Yeah, Voices, edited by Rhoda, and Rhoda worked with us, and by then we had a very different cohort of staff from what the situation Amina is describing. Rhoda worked a lot with Elaine Sarlo, for example. Some of you might know the name, lovely South African feminist who did an enormous amount of work in many spaces. And it was amazing having Rhoda with us for a year. But yeah, don't let me run off. Yeah, I'm going to run off. I'm going to run. Just like start a side conversation with Rhoda. I mean, now you ask about the moment of late 1999, 2000, when you joined the AGI. But in fact, you were with us before that. The permission for, well, let me start a little further back. Some of you will know the name of Mampela Rampele, who is a very well-renowned South African-based, extraordinary, maverick, difficult, interesting person of persons. And she spent very, very interesting life, suffered banning, lost critical partners under the age of 30 or so in apartheid years, very difficult. But eventually moved into a space where she was, after being part of a huge national research project on poverty in the early 90s, she got offered a chance to be with the Bunting Institute at Radcliffe. And there was something about Bunting's, I mean, yes, of course, Bunting, Radcliffe, there was something about that consortium's commitment to middle career women scholars who had been marginalized, whose work had not been taken seriously, and whose version of feminism led them to prioritize a certain relationship to women's leadership as key to transformation. Mampela liked that model, and she wanted to create that on the continent with an organization called FAWI, the Federation of African Women, which was an educational collective of ministers, African women ministers. And she established the AGI when she was in a leadership position at UCT in the hope that it would be kind of a combination of a Bunting and a mini Fawi, a hub for the recognition of African women's intellectual strength and resilience. That's how it started, but permission to do that was in fact outsourced, and outsourced by her. There was a group of 5, I remember who they were, but I'll just name a couple: Fatou Sow, Catherine Namudu, who took on, who were tasked by Mampela to say, can we start this in South Africa? Can we? Knowing what South Africa is. And that study took place the whole of 1994. And in 1995, on the strength of that report, which said, yes, you have a horrible racist, colonialist, impossible, an Africa-phobic history, but there is will, and yes, there are resources. That's how we began. And you, Amina, were part of the circle of people who came to help us set up what we called an associates program, with people as diverse as the extraordinary Desiree Lewis in South Africa and Juliet Tondlana from Zimbabwe. And I can just name so many, came into the AGI to animate the meaning of what an African Gender Institute might be. At the time, I was a worker there. I had no intention of working in a university. UCT went through a major crisis in 1999, insisting that all extraneous units be insourced and had to teach. Actually 7 out of 8 AGI staff left at that point because they did not want to become institutionalized in that way. I was the only one left, and I only stayed because I had a certain set of financial responsibilities and had just taken on a partnership with very young children. I still wonder if I made a mistake. So that's why Amina came to a very new zone. I've talked far too much. Sorry. Stopping now.
Thank you. Thank you. So the serendipity, the precarity are coming through more. When I landed in South Africa, I did not know this. And I'm glad I didn't know just how fragile the Institute was. And we managed to keep it going. So that's the founding. And I'm going to roll it over and say, okay, so we have 2 very different institutes, differently positioned and in progress. It was a very rash thing to float a journal on our part, because I'm moving now to my editor role, and then I'm going to turn it over to Patricia. So I came into the AGI as a chair tasked with 2 things. 1, running the Institute, and 2, being a full-time academic. To secure the Institute, Jane had proceeded to roll out an entire undergraduate teaching program, which students were coming to. So that secured the AGI. They would have shut it down otherwise, because meanwhile, there had been a huge crisis in African studies. They had suspended Mahmoud Mamdani. They never hired Mafeji. So there'd been 2 big public shames, if you like, around the treatment of African academics. And I arrived into that. So you know what, as a feminist, I just got my head down with my colleagues and sisters and we went to work quietly. So we were very peripheral. The Mampela, the vice chancellor who gave us tacit support, left. And thereafter, we kept a fairly, I want to say, a quietish profile in South Africa, but grew. My role there was to grow the continental programs. So to grow the continental programs, coming from Nigeria, it's true I came with certain networks and certain experiences, but I arrived there as digitalization was happening. So coming from northern Nigeria with frustrations over even electricity, and the military was still in power. Bacha was still in power when I decided to relocate and be an academic at University of Cape Town. Like Jane, we were all ambivalent. Us feminists were very ambivalent about the university. But I saw UCT and I saw resources and I saw that it needed to have a bit of Africa added to it, and proceeded running the AGI, bringing a lot of African feminists and just African women scholars in, and the rest is history. So it was within a year, we to make ourselves viable and credible, we convened. So everything the AGI did on this very thin institutional link was community building and networking. So it relied entirely on outreach, and that was how the Institute worked. We raised, apart from running teaching full-time, on the side, we raised project funds and grew a lot of writing projects mostly. Soon enough, we needed a publication because there is nowhere for African feminist writing at the time. There was nowhere for African feminist writing, theoretical and activist, because the Institute from the beginning was about reanimating that synergy between theory and practice, and South Africa was the perfect place. They had all these new policies and no idea how to implement them. So there were many things that made it work. And Feminist Africa came out of that first regional convening. And so it's not even our idea. I do want to keep reaffirming this. I will say that for the first 6 issues, it didn't have an official editor. Because we were very collectivist, we didn't want to claim ownership. We were there doing the work and trying to raise the funds and using funds from other projects to put up an independent publication. So the first time I'm named editor is actually Rhoda, it's your issue, because the editing isn't owned. It was always rotated and shared. We've not had the opportunity to have a full-time editor, but we did have to name one. And of course, maybe I regret that because my name was on that journal from 2006 only. It started in 2002, partly to secure it. And this was a strategy I still feel ambivalent about, but I'm still listed as the founding editor. Actually, Jane, myself, Desiree, Elaine, there's a team of people at the AGI, all of whom had a hand in this. And Desiree actually edited the 2nd issue on culture. So we try to rotate it, but also because it's way too much work for one person. So it's always been very collective, and it relies entirely on ongoing mobilization of a community of users and contributors. It survived Cape Town. Every issue was a story, from the very first one, which we called Intellectual Politics, to set the scene. And this is one of my cloths on the margin. I mean, we were very basic, but we wanted it professional. We knew it had to be in hard copy because our own Jenny Radloff, who's now with APC, Association of Progressive Communicators, and was then, was our ICT consultant. We had her do a survey, and African women, like myself at that time in Nigeria, didn't have the access. It was dial-up modems, tink, 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 very expensive, couldn't download a publication. So we kept it very light. I think it was HTML and open access, and that's still open access. That is something that is constantly threatened. But I think we're clear within the collective that if people have to buy it, Africans won't afford it and will not have access to it. So we're trying to stay outside the, the captive, say, academic capitalist circuit by putting it out there. That has, so there are many issues, even for our writers and our contributors. People are named, people who learn copyright, but it's every issue has been an adventure throughout the time at Cape Town. So we're grateful, very grateful to the University of Cape Town for allowing an African Gender Institute to exist. Because while they did that, we were able to do a huge amount of work. across the region, and Feminist Africa has been suspended since 2017 because the Institute is changing its focus, I think. I don't know too much about it, but it also became clear that Feminist Africa would become something very different if we moved it from post-apartheid South Africa, where Jane really said people are babies. That's not an insult. It's the newest country in Africa. In Ghana, there's a much older tradition of Pan-African intellectualism. So we spent a number of years negotiating and canvassing around the continent before we found that home. So I'm going to turn over to the editors we can respond in questions. We don't want to talk too long. So I'm going to turn over to Patricia Mohammed, who was the first editor of the first named editor, in case there's a story like ours, the first named editor, the editor of the Caribbean Review of Gender Studies. Patricia.
Hello, everyone. I won't say good morning or good afternoon because it's different times in every space. So hello, what a wonderful gathering, and to reunite as well with Amina, who, as she said, we've had history.
We shared a house in Holland. Remember, 110 Van Leustraat.
But yes, we've had good times. And it is interesting listening to know the collection, the narratives of both institutes, to begin to dredge our memories about things we took for granted. And also a point that emerges for me is the way in which, despite these parallel foundational things happening, we were not sharing. And in a sense, that is the issue that brought me to what we did with the journal. So let me begin by also establishing, as Rhoda mentioned, that I was very much part of the development of the Institute in its earlier phases. I was part of the foundational activities. Again, we met Amina when you came over at one of our interdisciplinary seminars, I think. And I moved from this space of setting up seminars, regional direction of seminars. In fact, being there from 1986 in the inaugural seminar, which was pre-women and development studies, or at the same, no, not pre, it was around the same time they were gathering. And I make this point to link it to something that I think became very central to my understanding of why publication was so important. Coming out of that first seminar I set up, the inaugural one, I produced Gender in Caribbean Development, which was our first reader after the Women in Caribbean project, but it was our first reader, and I had already begun to see the need for us to establish a tradition of scholarship, research, publication, activism. All of it is built into that. It is the further exposure, I think, when I became part of the ISS, doing a PhD there, exposure at the IDS as well, Sussex, that I began to get involved with international publishing and recognizing the politics of publishing more. Who was published where, and how knowledge was situated in the hands of certain people who wouldn't know us, and we were somehow the recipients. And unless we could create and carve that space, own our knowledge, and make it accessible, we were really not going to fight that. We were really not making it. So that is what led me by 2006 to conceive of, and it's interesting you said yours had already started by 2002. But in 2006, I cannot remember. I know it was an initiative I took, but I know that there were many discussions around it and the buying of all the institutes, the various units. Rhoda spoke about we are spread across the campuses, the region. I know there was a collective agreement, even in terms of coming up with the title, the Caribbean Review of Gender Studies. It was meant, we spent a long time figuring out what would be a name for this that would be embracing and collective. And I think Caribbean Review of Gender Studies meant that we were putting, almost imposing review as a part of it, for the academic academic circle, but also giving it a Caribbean gender spread. And it was supposed to be the de facto journal of the Institute. However, the IGDS, in fact, St. Augustine took on the major role, as we still do, of supporting administration, production, and so on. I know Dr. Hussein will take this further, so I'm not going to deal with the struggles that we have now and the way in which the journal itself has invited guest editors and so on. So I'll leave that to her. I'll just deal with the beginnings, if you like. The two things, and I'm going on the questions you asked, the grand vision. If I were to quote a grand vision, and I like the way in my first issue, number 1, and I was the founding editor, and Dr. Hussein became the other executive editor who was in fact taking over for me. But we still, support. I'm still very much part of it. One of the things that I said is, and I do want to quote this, knowledge has always been associated with the currencies of power and control. What is new at this time are the methods by which technologies of knowledge dissemination have transformed how we acquire and are given access to information. The Caribbean, like many other societies, are major downloaders of information from multiple sites, etc. What I wanted to do was tap into this inventive technology of publishing so that we might reach more people in a relatively short time, reduce the cost of this dissemination of hard copy material, because we know publishing is an expensive business. And later on, in that first 2007, I actually anticipated the expansion of formats for publishing, sound, visual, everything, because I knew that was coming. I'd already started making films, so I understood what was going to be the future, if you like, in a sense. And so therefore, do I have time to just say what are some of the positive aspects of it?
Yes, please do. It's necessary.
Right. Yes, and the interesting thing is, and I know Rhoda may come in and support me here. First, it had the full support of Rhoda as head on the St. Augustine campus. She is very much aligned with me in this. We both share similar view of publishing and the need for that. And there was no challenge to it. I think the other reason there was no challenge is we were forerunners. We were prescient. We were way before our time. There was no other volume like that. And interestingly, it drew me back to something. What I think happened to me is, because I've studied the history of publishing, as it were, in the Caribbean at some level. In 1924, the Journal of Tropical Agriculture, which led to the emergence of the University of the West in the St. Augustine campus, was a major forerunner for that university itself. In 1930, we had a similar medical journal, which still exists. Both of them were central for tropical agriculture and tropical medicine. I was seeing this as tropical, if you like tropical, not in the same vein, reclaiming the tropical. And I think that is what the vision was as well. Where we had great allies on the campus was that the librarian, who was Frank Sudin, who is now our campus librarian, was also advancing digitalization across the campuses, and certainly on the St. Augustine campus. He was gung-ho, he was supportive, and he brought knowledge. The campus IT was extremely supportive, allocating people to us and helped us support it. On the IGDS, I think we had Catherine Chan, who was already there, lending support to our artistic, and we even had a design for it. And so, in a sense, we had a really sound base because there was no reason for people to challenge it at the time. And what remained, I think Rhoda might help me on this. I think what happened is we were funded through the Institute at first, with through the Institute funding, but as that kept drying up, we had to seek funding. We got some of that from the Campus Research and Publications Fund, which I later supported as the chair of that fund when I left the post. We left the HDS. Gabby will also talk about that and the challenges with that, but we managed to keep it going. So the essential thing, and the last point I'll make is, in terms of its reach to a feminist community, I noticed on the chat line, someone asked about CAFRA. and the Caribbean Association Feminist Research and Action. That's another area that was also allied with research and feminist activism. And Rhoda was part of that. I was in the preliminary days part of it. So there was a lot of give and take between these. I think when we began to also change the nature of the journal to incorporate action research, activism, speeches, and so on, we began to think of how we memorialize things that would be part of an activist work.
Hey.
So I think the journal has expanded and has grown. So I'll get time to talk about more. Thank you, Amin. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very hard. I'm sorry. I feel quite bad because living that history, you know, it's so rich, and this is like a first. I hope we'll continue this conversation because there's so much that's different. I am struck by the fact that you were at home on your own campus in the University of West Indies, and you were also part of the administration. So this thing has grown as you all have ascended through the university. I left Cape Town. The AGI remains a small unit, although it did continental programs for a long time, but we haven't got the same kind of structural insertion, I want to say. So you can see that in the title. Yours was a review that responds to a scholarly need in a scholarly community. Feminist Africa, the title is Heralding a Vision. So it's not about capturing what is, it's more out there, make the space and then fill it, as opposed to, you know, we've got this and therefore make a space. It's almost the upside down, almost the other way around. We felt the need not just to publish all the work that AGI associates and people were publishing, and we had a newsletter, but we understood that the continent itself, women were unpublished. So we wanted to create the space to publish, but that publishing isn't visible, it's not available. So we had to draw the people into the space to get the publishing. And then we found we had to do writing workshops and research workshops. So the AGI is generating the research and the teaching and the projects only, and we're floating the journal. So much more precarious, I want to say, much more experimental.
I want to one thing. I think your comment that we had that groundwork before, the disciplinary and interdisciplinary seminars, which had, and the Women in the Caribbean Project had created a mushrooming.
Absolutely.
Had to be somewhere.
And look at the books. The books tell the story. Yeah, I'm saying that the fact that you did books before, Jen and I are still talking about doing that collection for teachers, you know, but because it's open access, no one wants to publish it, imagine. But we do need a reader for the campuses, which of course we've got over 50, I think. We're still counting gender studies centers across Africa now that we're now trying to reconnect with. So this thing could be very big if we connect with all the centers and we share the commitment to activism. We understand feminist thought as movement work and use the university accordingly. So we share that critical perspective, but the positioning is so different. I'm going to just be really merciless because of time and go and invite Akosua Darkwa, who is at the Institute of African Studies in her own capacity, faculty and research, fascinating background I can't go into, but Akosua is about to edit a forthcoming issue, which is very topical for now. So can I do a plug? We're doing a special issue on 2020 and the pandemic. So there's a call out now on our website. Akosua will be editing that issue. But she's been involved with the AGI and Feminist Africa for much longer. Akosua, over to you and welcome.
Thank you, Amina, and greetings everybody wherever you are. So I'd like to say I'm really honored to be in this space to hear from people whose words and work shaped me in fundamental ways. So I actually was born an academic in the year that Feminist Africa was born, 2002. And I have to say my first encounter with Amina, Charmaine, Sylvia, and so on was I think it was 2004. Mm. And I still have that feeling of self-affirmation from that meeting, which is important to acknowledge here because that is what keeps me committed to the project. it was a space where I saw for the very first time in my life, a room filled with women who looked like me, who understood what our continent was about, and we were writing about this continent. There were names I'd never heard of, and I could encounter them and their work in a way which I'd never done before. I mean, I'd done a PhD, I had written comprehensive examinations, I'd read all manner of things, but I hadn't encountered these women. And it's very important for me that that same feeling I had in 2004 can be replicated in 2040, in 2050, by girls who are being born today. So I'm committed to Feminist Africa on that account. It's a huge responsibility, but I think it's an incredible honor and privilege to be part of this. So I come to the journal as, I guess you'd say, a second generation scholar in that respect. I'm benefiting from what others did. And I'm using that benefit to ensure that the next generation get the same. So we have the advantage of digitalization and social media in a way in which 20 years ago, Amina and Co did not have. And so our responsibility is to ensure that we use that to drive Feminist Africa into spaces and places that it hasn't been able to reach before this point. And I'm encouraging you to go to our website to look at the call, not just the call on the pandemic issue, but look at other calls that will come in and to contribute. We are on the cusp of something quite great and important. And at Legon, we have a Pan-African spirit in the Institute of African Studies. Kwame Nkrumah was our first president. He set up the institute, but we also have a very long history of feminist academics and activists who are supporting the journal in its second phase. So we've also got a Center for Gender Studies and Advocacy that's at this point 14 years old. It was started in 2006. And I was part of that whole process of writing the proposal, going to defend it in front of the Vice Chancellor at the time. I ended up as third director of the center and so on. So we've got a core group of women, those who are nearer retirement, those of us who are mid-career, and we've also got some new entrants, people who've just finished their PhDs, who are committed to the work of feminist scholars and activists. And so that's the body of women and some men who are really going to drive Feminist Africa in its new phase, using digital media and social media to make that transition happen. And I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Kosua. And you know, we've really plunged you into the light. As I said, she's editing the forthcoming issue, but as she shared, she was involved in our first project on sexualities. I think the AGI and Feminist Africa were the first to do that project on African sexualities as a curriculum project, because we were tired of teaching women in development, because women's front lines are not the women in development industry. So, you know, we were switching the paradigm on so many fronts, but that's where I met Akosua as an incredibly enthusiastic and vibrant researcher on the first project to map sexualities. You were researching virgin clubs, I believe. Anyway, so the thing is, I mean, I like the fact that what's coming out is that there's this personal mesh of people, and that is what gives me heart. I will not say that any of what we did surviving at the UCT was easy. It wasn't. Jane, you're so brave to still be there. I think most of the African faculty the men lasted 3 years max, and they were out, some died. But as women, we just kept a low profile, and I survived 10 years before I found it necessary to move. Moving Feminist Africa from South Africa, the post-apartheid movement, to Ghana, this very same period that Africa Free Trade Community is launched, and there are these big heritage and homecoming projects in Ghana, is also very compatible with our transatlantic interests. So we're going to be talking with our colleagues about the transatlantic collaborations in the future, because these are so overdue. We know they've happened. You know, Mrs. Kuti met Amy Garvey. Amy Garvey went to Ghana. I mean, there's lots of bits that, you know, we're still tracing. So we have a very rich collaborative history, particularly between the Caribbean and West Africa. And the thing that's different now at the University of Ghana is we are in a much stronger institution with a much better, in a sense, more compatible history. We're trying to take Pan-Africanism to South Africa. We've got the African Renaissance, but now Feminist Africa is rooting, if you like, in the home of African knowledge, where the African Studies Association is, and colleagues are producing the Contemporary Journal for African Studies. So we're in an ecosystem with many people like Akosua to carry it. So we're in succession. I want to say that then we're going to leave it in a minute, because the editorship it's no longer just in my name. It's been recollectivized, but naming 5 people. And the editorship for me, it's transitional. I definitely have to leave it. That does not mean I will leave Feminist Africa at all, but I definitely, no individual name should be, this is our thinking in the circles. I don't think any individual should be indispensable. So I feel a great urgency about stepping aside, not to stop the work, because this is a movement thing, so we're all working all the time, but making sure that it succeeds, otherwise it will die. What's different is we've now agreed to raise money for Feminist Africa. Free meant freer before, with no funding. We've changed that. We're going for institutionalization. Not quite the same model as you have, but clearly the need to embed very strongly in a stable institution in a socio-political context of great instability. Okay, now let's move to I'd like to invite Gabrielle to give us a few minutes on her experience. And you've been there a little longer. Kos was just coming in, but obviously you have a lot to share. Gabrielle.
Hi, everyone. So there's so much to say about the moment right now. Professor Mohammed highlighted the fact that for the history of the journal, from the first issue until present, we have been supported and funded by the University of the West Indies. That's been excellent. And that funding has not just been through, for example, the Campus Research and Publication Fund. It's also been in terms of the way that we have managed to incorporate support for the journal into the work of some of our staff. And so it's now built in a sense, into the costs or funds for our staffing. Yet at the same time, from this year, we will not have institutional support available to pay for such things as layout and copy editing. And so not just the neoliberal model of us all having to be entrepreneurial has taken over, but also the impact, in a sense, of austerity that comes out of the ways that economies have been managed globally, regionally, and nationally, and the ways that forecloses sources of funds that were previously available for feminist knowledge production, forcing us to now have to go out to other funds somewhere in the world, competing with a range of other issues besides research and publication, or having to in some way convince the private sector to give us the kinds of endowments that can support the journal. And so we have found ourselves, and I suppose this was always the case, one always had to get funds, one always had to, get support wherever one could. But it's the ideological expectation of the moment now is that everyone will be entrepreneurial. The journal will be supported through an entrepreneurial capacity to have the market in a way meet its cost, and that requires a lot of mental agility And it requires just accepting that while, we're all now in competition, funds in the economy are ever more consolidated amongst the wealthy. So it appears that there's less funds in the world, and yet 30% own as much as 30 people own as much as the bottom 3 billion, and yet we're competing, with so many other things and dire issues, health issues, hunger issues, children's support issues, and yet we're competing for all of those, for private sector, corporate social responsibility, private sector support, charity, however it is you want to raise it. And so really living in the midst of that transition and having to see it, like it or not, in terms of how we create and seize opportunities, rather than simply how we lament what we know are the costs of an ideological ideological moment that measures everything in the extent to which, in an economistic frame, in terms of its monetary value, in terms of its market impact, and so on. And so that's really where we are right now. And my approach has always been to try and seize whatever it is the challenge that we're facing is, and kind of go headlong into trying to conquer it. And that's why we're feminists fighting patriarchy and all its other intersections. Otherwise, we wouldn't be if we didn't have that personality, we wouldn't be in this place together. So we are, in fact, now attempting to do exactly that, ally with the private sector, ally with the banks, ally with the big tech companies. And it's not tobacco companies, it's not the big oil giants, but it is exactly what it always was. And having to count on a particular kind of, capitalist capacity to legitimize what really, is meant to be an extremely critical and autonomous space. And so my goal is to get as much funds as I can, almost like an endowment, to then be able, in the end, to give us the autonomy that we need if it is the university will not continue to support us. Now, the Caribbean Review of Gender Studies is the university's first and only longest publishing online journal. Its brilliance is not just its academic, its peer-reviewed papers, but it has space because it's digital and online and has been from the beginning. Its brilliance is that it has space for video essays, photo essays, poetry, any kind of format that is needed. It can hold that format. And in fact, we encourage editors to curate an issue, to see the issue as a digital space, not just as an academic journal. I mean, that was really in Professor Mohammed's original vision, because knowledge, as we know, speaking from the Global South, is created and expressed in so many forms outside of academia, and honoring and putting those next to and in conversation with academic publishing is absolutely vital, to honor the way knowledge is created in the Global South. Just to say, where are we going otherwise? One of my goals in life is that we find ways to understand and protect and continue a particular kind of vision, even as we may innovate in small ways. We're often pressed to innovate and keep innovating, and yet we're innovating all the time in every way, financially, in terms of mentoring new persons who come in terms of how we think visually, in terms of how we market and place ourselves and form alliances, in terms of who we invite to be special editors. And we've made a big emphasis of always having one editor in the Caribbean, well, encouraging co-editors, but trying to always have one speaking from the Caribbean, working in the Caribbean, because the Caribbean is an area that is so studied by others as well as by people from the Caribbean, but who are not living in the Caribbean. And for me, the joy of this was that we were publishing about the Caribbean, from within the Caribbean. And that is a really important location. And so we continue to try to encourage as much as possible that there's collaborative editing with someone always from or in the Caribbean. Preferably, we try to encourage that our editors can come from all over the world, you know, wherever they are in the Caribbean diaspora, our combination of young scholars as well as older established ones. And so I think we have a lot that we've gotten right, to be honest. I think our goals, and that I feel quite proud of, our last issue was on African Caribbean women, migration, diaspora, and post-diaspora. So by Dr. Leet Dunn and Dr. Suzanne Scaff. And so, you know, in our next issues, we've done a call for a range of themes that we think are contemporary, whether around mental health, or around, you know, what's happening in global women's movements and so on. So honestly, I think that we're in quite a strong position. Professor Mohammed continues to have oversight and probably will as long as she's alive. So until, you know, both feet are in the grave, all the profs are ones that we rely on, and that kind of intergenerational, you know, guidance, I think, is absolutely crucial, and we love that. I think that our challenges now are how we position and pivot our strengths to make sure that those can be sustained over the next decade. And that's really where my head is at.
Thank you. That's perfect. I'm getting a time check. I've been reading the chat. I'm not seeing many questions. We're seeing thank you. And particularly, I want to underline the last thank you, which is to thank you, Gabrielle, for bringing it back to the realities that we're trying to change, because a journal looks so remote from poverty, pandemics, as these are lived by real people, and, you know, that distance. But the point is, we need feminism at all these levels, and we need to articulate ideas with realities constantly. So in a way, what these local productions do is enable us to bypass empire and respond directly to the field without having to go via all the academic discourse of the West. That is the real power. We can be grounded. We can engage with our own women and what their struggles are in situ, and then reflect that. So I think that's what distinguishes, and why we're both, I hear, you know, we're very committed to who's living and working. So I have felt wrong carrying the editorship since I had to leave the continent 10 years ago. I'm just headed back, but that, you know, these things need to be rooted, not just in our regions, in our institutions, in those of us who are living there on the front line of that reality because of empire, because of externalization. So these journals are also about continuous grounding of our own intelligence and making it flourish. And I'm using the word intelligence in a real broad sense. We all need intelligence to move forward. I think we're almost out of time. I'm still checking for questions. Do any of my beautiful roundtable want to come back? I'm inclined to go back to the beginning, but I want to thank Gabrielle and Akosua, because you're injecting the feeling of the capacious possibilities and what's opening up before us, which is actually vast vistas. So part of the timeliness of this getting together is we're going to need to hold hands and maybe swap interns and editors and, you know, exchange so we can continue this learning, albeit the differences are very clear too, but I think we can learn a lot. So we must carry this on. I'm going to go back to Rhoda and yes, Patricia.
Right, there's something that I found, and I had to deal with this a lot as in graduate studies and research where I work last. And that had to do with this new challenge of impact factors and the tyranny of impact factors and the way in which our journals did not have right, you know, the impact indicators that allowed us to then be even considered within our own setting. So while we find the material useful, while it is important to publish, there's still a a genuflection to knowledge that is created in the North and less so to South-South interaction. So I think it's a challenge that we still have to deal with our publishing. I don't think we've tackled it. I'm hoping that impact factors don't remain tyrannical forever and the publishing and perishing, because that is a whole other minefield with a lot of flaws that people have not really considered. So I just want to throw that on board.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just seeing that we shouldn't have shortchanged on the introductions because apparently the leaflet didn't go out. So I'm just sending the names, but I think I can invite people in the chat to just add any connections you want, like the links to your journals. Someone's kindly, Jifa in Accra has added the FA link. So please put those up on the chat. Oh, sorry, CRGS. Anyway, yes, okay. Final remarks. Yes, Rhoda, this conversation does need to go on. That's my last remark. What's yours? And then Jane.
Yes, I certainly agree with you. I feel like if we've just scratched the surface, I think it's so exciting. I'm wondering if we shouldn't write it up, you know, comparing the two experiences and the lessons we have learned and the way forward. But I think one major difference that has affected us in the Caribbean is that we have generally lost most access to global funding. And that happened a long time ago. So that, you know, so that there are very few spaces, you know, for global academic support that exists for us. So that's why I think that GAPS spoke of having to be so resourceful in terms of identifying funding support for the work that you do. And I think that we could probably, despite the difficulties, I think we could probably learn from you how to access global funding, even though I know the Caribbean is in a different place. But I think there are skills that you all on the continent have developed over the years that we probably learn from. So I just wanted to agree with Pat that that issue of the tyranny of impact factors is important. And I was wondering whether FA had thought about that over its time and what did they come up with? What rationale, justification, or what position did they take on this?
Jane, I'm going to turn over to you. And then we're going to close out. I think we're out of time here. So please post your links. I've just posted a response. Someone said, how can we support? Well, part of why we're here, and I will openly say this, is because we only survive with the input, the support of the community. Our readers help us survive, because nowadays, since we're going to be applying for funding, they want to know how many 100,000 are reading and where are they located. So what's important to us is our communities, our local communities of readers, as well as external support. But that grounding remains important. So we call, first of all, to all the feminists in our regions to sign up, become new readers, look what's going on, and then become contributors, help define this digital architecture, which is what we're calling it, because it's a framework in which the populating and the peopling is entirely up to our movements and the women. We only exist as a structure we've set up to allow the flow of knowledge as facilitators of feminist exchanges of knowledge. And we're not meant to stay in the academy. So I want to, Jane, did you have an answer for Rhoda on that last question?
Thanks, Rhoda, for the question. And Amina, let me give it a go. Actually, Rhoda, at the couple of years ago, as Feminist Africa was moving into this transition, where it's now based at the Institute of African Studies in Legon, which is just amazing from so many perspectives. But there was a group of people who'd been associated with its growth over several years, who came together to discuss the processes of this transition. And the H factor issue, to be quite honest, nearly derailed the entire meeting. And I don't think any of us sitting there, except the person who had brought the issue, which I'm not going to name, wonderful feminist, amazing. It wasn't an issue until she spoke about it for anybody but her. And it was that Feminist Africa should become a journal that young feminists would want to be published in, because that would give them impact factor recognition in their context. And this was brought to us by somebody who is not naive about patriarchy and the institutions. This is somebody who totally gets, I would want to say, I'm going to say it of her, who totally gets the terms of the struggle on which young African, and of course Black, meaning many different relationships to that term, fight for survival in universities. She knew that. And we wrestled. Yo, did we wrestle. There were some of us that thought this was a level of colonization we couldn't tolerate. Not that we used that word. We were civil. There were others of us who felt that we had to create a journal that was an empowering space for young writers, intellectual trajectories in universities, as well as maintaining our journals as the kind of space Patricia is describing, where other modes of writing, other than peer-reviewed, could be included. So to answer the question, Rhoda, is really, I would want to say, this deserves our thinking, our research, our writing. Is it true that as a young feminist in an African university, it is more important to you to have an H factor than to have an intellectual community that cares about your work? Which would you choose? What? I am a person who has an extremely respectable H factor. Has it helped me in one way or another in terms of gaining the respect of UCT colleagues? The answer is no.
No.
Because of what I write. And because of who I interact with, and because of where I publish.
Thank you.
Actor looks so squeaky, but these things, these false hoops, these fake line item KPAs that we're all encouraged to think of as a route to credibility are traps.
Traps, every one of them. Okay, we're going to have to, thank you.
Can't ignore them, but you did not need to send me on a, Amina, but I galloped. Important that we had until 6 o'clock for this seminar.
I'm sorry about
2
this.
hours.
We're out of time, and we have a beautiful poet. Is it a poet? An artist who is waiting to present to us. So I'm really sorry to cut this off, but Sima Sabiti is a saxophonist. So it's just the sign that we have to actually set up our own webinars and continue this. And yes, we would love to publish it. So as we convene this first one, I'll take responsibility for saying we'll download it, and we together will co-edit it, and we could both publish it. Why not? We have different communities, double up the power. Thank you all very, very much. And I'm going to welcome yeah, to be continued. And there's so much we didn't get to. How do we get non-academic women published is equally a big challenge. So, and that one has been on our front line rather than the H factor, but both are in play. Thank you all enormously. This has been inspiring. I needed inspiring. We are all encouraging each other, and this is the spirit of the Southern Feminist Futures Festival. So to the future. And Sima Sabiti, thank you so much for bringing your saxophone to us.
It's actually a flute. Thank you. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you so much.
Go ahead. You did think we had a 2-hour slot.
Yes, but thank you so much. I'm so honored to be part of this incredible festival. My name is Sima Chakwere Chomahendo Sabiti. I am actually a flautist, not a saxophonist, but I am a Ugandan, a musician, a radio presenter, a podcaster, a writer, a sister, a daughter, a friend, a woman. So many different roles played by the same human being, capably so. I know many of you fulfill the same roles, and dealing with all the challenges that comes with it. Before I introduce the piece that I prepared for you, just some thoughts when I was reading about the festival and also following all the amazing presentations that have happened these past couple of days. It's crazy to think that in 2020, women are still being squeezed into boxes at every turn. My experience in Uganda is if you are a female and you say you are a musician, the assumption is that you're a singer. And I'm always bemused by the reactions I get when I tell them that I'm an instrumentalist. People are like, "Oh, you play that thing. You're a woman performing in a band with men. You're women. Your parents let you have lessons to learn that instrument." And I say, you know what? Why not? When I look at the various themes for this year's South Feminist Futures Festival, building new knowledge strategies for change and resistance really stood out for me. New knowledge strategies, unlearning, dismantling patriarchal systems that have been placed on us since birth. And I can't begin to tell you the number of women who I've spoken to in person or who have reached out to me on social media, telling me they admire the fact that I've been able to do so many different things or hold different positions job-wise. And it always surprises me because I think if I can do it, so can you. And I'm looking forward to many more Ugandan and African female instrumentalists. We need more women occupying not only all the spaces we've been told that we don't belong in, but more women occupying all the spaces that we want to. So it's okay to be a flautist, a radio presenter, a magazine editor. It's okay to be a board executive, creative, a mom, the funky auntie, the lawyer, the doctor, the writer, the activist, all at the same time, because you are a woman and because you can. So the piece I prepared for you is a flute solo rendition of True Colors by Cyndi Lauper. It's a firm favorite of mine and speaks to something very dear to me in all my various roles, which is being there for the people who matter to me the most and reaffirming them. If you don't already know the lyrics, I hope they touch your heart as much as they do mine. Google them. And I'd really like to thank the organizers of the South Feminist Futures Festival for bringing us all together in this very difficult time. I'm very honored to be here, and I hope you enjoy the piece that I prepared. Thank you.
Wonderful, Seema. Thank you so much. That was beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, folks, that's it. We'll talk again soon. Seema, I'm coming to Uganda to see you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. You're more than welcome.
Thank you, South Feminists. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye,
Thank
Amina.
you all. This was fabulous. It was bitty, but, you know, starting a conversation. Over
Thanks,
ambitious.
Amina.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
everybody.
much, Amina.
It was a start and a treat.
Yes. Thank
All
you.
right. Bye.
Bye, everybody.